Hello and welcome to the command phase. My name is Mark and thank you so much for joining me. In this video we're going to be taking a look at all of the combat patrols and seeing which ones are worth buying to start a collection or potentially expand from a different starting point. These boxes are Games Workshop's discount offering to get into a faction, typically priced at £95, €125 or $160, which they'll be compared against to determine the value. In terms of breaking down each, we'll be looking to see what is in every box, the amount of points you can build from it from the recent January balanced data slate, the value you get from each box compared to buying each unit separately from Games Workshop, and also whether it's a good starting point for a force or even if it's worth getting multiples. Games Workshop have been updating these in 10th edition with the release of each new codex, so if there is a box you like and your faction is getting their new codex soon, according to the roadmap, it may be worth grabbing before it's too late. I won't be talking about how they fare against one another in the combat patrol format as I've not played that much myself, but I trust that Games Workshop has done a decent enough job of balancing these out. If you do play it, then please let both myself and the others know in the comment section below if there are any ones to pick up or avoid specifically for that format to help them out. So without any further ado, let's get stuck in. Starting off with the Space Marines, and this one is a bit of a weird one to determine the value due to the nature of the contents. Inside the box you get one captain in Terminator armor, one Terminator librarian, 5 Terminators and 5 Infernus Marines, which brings you to a total of 435 points, which is about middle of the road for these sets. Value is where this box falls down big time. If you were to buy these models separately, you'd be looking at about a 13% discount on average, which is a bit misleading as all of the units inside the box are the monopose ones you get from the starter sets and the Leviathan box set. This may well not be a deal breaker for you, but especially with the Terminators, I'd rather have the weapon options. That being said, if you ended up buying the Ultimate Starter set for a little bit more, you would also get the Tyranid Combat Patrol on top, which if you can split with a friend or you could purchase the Marine half off eBay, then the value is far greater. You do get all new sculpts in the box, which is a plus, although having 2 Terminator characters to the one squad that they can join doesn't particularly help gameplay wise. I certainly wouldn't recommend buying this Combat Patrol box when there are far better value options elsewhere, but it is an okay starting point for a low cost depending on how you purchase it. Onto the Black Templars now, and inside this chapter themed Combat Patrol box you get 1 Black Templars Marshal, a Primaris Crusader squad, 5 Primaris Intercessors and an Impulsor, alongside the Black Templar upgrade sprue. This will come in on the lower end of the points, allowing you to build 375. In terms of value, this is a very common theme you'll see with the vast majority of the Space Marine chapter boxes, and it's that the upgrade sprue is part of the value in the box. 36% if you can utilise it, and without it, it becomes a lot worse at just 21%. That being said, at least this Combat Patrol utilises chapter specific units like the Marshal and Crusader squad, which are both really good options. The upgrade sprue is one of the better ones being more recent, but the intercessors in the box feel like a bit of a filler to get balance to the Combat Patrol format rather than being useful for army building going forwards. The Impulsor is an okay addition to transport the units around too, so definitely not one to be disappointed in. Overall, if you're planning on starting a Black Templars force and will utilise the upgrade sprue, it is a pretty decent starting point. If you'd rather have more of their unique units, then I'd probably avoid. Then we start with the chapters that don't really utilise any of their unique units with the Blood Angels. Inside the box you get 1 Primaris Librarian, 5 Primaris Intercessors, 5 Primaris Incursors, 3 Primaris Aggressors and 1 Impulsor, plus 2 upgrade sprues. Point wise, this comes in towards the middle with 430 points on the table. In terms of value, this is one of the highest boxes at 44%, and even if you take the 2 upgrade frames out as you're planning to use them to start a different chapter of Marines, then it's still up there with a 36% discount. That being said, this is where the good news stops for me. I understand the potential lack of older sculpts for their chapter specific units like Death Company and Sanguinary Guard, as we have no idea whether they'll get updated in the near future. But with the aggressors being the only melee unit in the force, it's a little bit disappointing, and honestly, the vast majority of players utilise them for their shooting capability with an Apothecary Biologist and the Fire Discipline enhancement. While I can't recommend this box for a Blood Angels player to start, it is a nice mix of units, and at a heavy discount it may well be one for Space Marine players to consider. You can always increase the discount of the box by selling off the unwanted upgrade sprues. The Dark Angels Combat Patrol is next, and this is one I'm a little disappointed about. With the new codex just around the corner, we know what their new combat patrol is going to be, and well, it's just not as good as the current one. Inside the box you'll get 1 Captain in Gravis armor, 10 Primaris Intercessors, 3 Blade Guard Veterans, 5 Hellblasters, and a Dark Angels upgrade sprue. This brings you to a total of 455 points, which is about average for these boxes. In terms of the discount, you're looking at about 30% if you want the upgrade sprue and 18% if not. The Captain in Gravis armor is such a weird choice for this box with no units he can join. I'd have liked to have seen more Dark Angels themed units inside like the Black Templars Force Guards, but from Games Workshop's point of view, I can kind of understand it being open to other chapters. The rest of the units are decent options for the infantry of a Space Marines army, just that Captain being a very odd choice. If you're happy to sell off the frames and one of the captains, 2 boxes wouldn't be a bad start for an army for a brand new player who can expand with more of the vehicles and specialised units. But when we look at what is currently available for Dark Angels players for the next couple of weeks until the codex release, you can see why it's a bit of a shame. Each of these, while not superb for discount, are really impactful units for a lot of chapters and one of the best Marine combat patrols around. So if you're thinking you like the looks of this, grab it while you can. Up next is the Space Wolves Combat Patrol, and you'll be happy to know we only have one more Space Marine box with upgrade sprues to go. Inside the box you get a unique Primaris Lieutenant Haldor Ice Pelt, although his rules are no longer available in game, so you'll just have to use him as a Primaris Lieutenant, 10 Primaris Intercessors, 5 Primaris Reavers, or you can build them as the Hounds of Morkai, 1 Invicta Tactical Warsuit, and 2 Space Wolves upgrade sprues. This box puts out 455 points on the table, which is pretty much middle of the pack. In terms of value, again with the Marine boxes, the upgrade sprues inflate it considerably, so you're looking at 32% if you wanted to utilise them, or just 22% if not, which certainly isn't great. The box again falls into the trap of not very much on theme for Space Wolves, bar the really nice sculpted character, which you can't get any other way. It's a faster moving scout style force without really any melee, but honestly if you're thinking of starting a Space Wolf army, this wouldn't be the way to go at all. It's very much a, if you like the models and want to paint them up, then go for it, but in terms of what a Space Wolf army would run, this isn't it. Now onto the Deathwatch Combat Patrol, and we run into the same issue of a Space Marine Combat Patrol that is better for other chapters than the one whose name is on it. Inside the box you get 1 Primaris Lieutenant, 1 Primaris Apothecary, 10 Primaris Intercessors, 3 Primaris Aggressors, and 2 Deathwatch upgrade sprues. Building this force will get you 395 points on the table, which is definitely on the lower end. It also sits towards the bottom in terms of value for money too, with 31% if you wanted to use the 2 upgrade sprues and 21% if not. This wouldn't be too bad a start for a Marines army with 2 useful characters, Intercessors being a good cheap troop unit and the Aggressors being one of the better units in the codex right now. That being said, it's probably not very exciting for someone getting into the game with no standout centerpiece unit or model, and certainly not what you'd call a Deathwatch force. I'd have liked more flavour here for it being a specific chapter's box, but that's very much wishful thinking with all of the other chapter boxes that we've seen. Onto the Grey Knights Combat Patrol now, and one of the best army boxes available. Inside you get 1 Brotherhood Librarian in Terminator armor, which is the only place you can buy this model now, 1 Nemesis Dread Knight which could also be built as the Grand Master if you wanted to, 5 Grey Knight Terminators which can also be built as the Paladins, and last of all is a 5-man strike squad which can also be built as the Interceptors, Purifiers or Purgation squad depending on your needs. This box can build a force anywhere between 630 and 670 points depending on the units you build, which needless to say is one of the highest available depending on the loadout. In terms of value, these are older kits, so the discount is only 21%, but this is where that number is a little misleading. If you are starting Grey Knights, you'll want at least one of this box, if not multiples. It has every kit in here to be able to build what you want, plus with the buffs in the latest data slate to Dread Knights, it may well be the perfect time to get some into your lists. Honestly, even 3 boxes and converting the librarian to say a chaplain or selling him off wouldn't even be the worst idea either. Honestly, this box is a slam dunk if you're interested in starting Grey Knights. Following up one of the best boxes with arguably one of the worst is the Adeptus Mechanicus. This was recently updated with their codex release and unfortunately it's a sorry state. Inside the box you get 1 Tech Priest Manipulus, 10 Skitarii Vanguard which can also be built as Rangers, 5 Taraxi Sterilizers or Skystalkers and 3 Cerberus Sulphur Hounds or Raiders. Even with the most expensive loadout from this, it's a measly 270 points on the tabletop, which just doesn't feel great. It's over 100 points worse off than the next combat patrol for what you get on the table, which just seems to be much of an AdMech problem than anything else. In terms of value, these units give you a 28% discount from buying separately, which certainly isn't the worst when you take a look at the Marines, but it's still a little disappointing. The Tech Priest and Skitarii are both useful units now, and the other 2, while they look pretty cool, are just poor in terms of price per point right now. The older box did have some more iconic units like the Cataphren Destroyers and Dunecrawler, whereas this just lacks a little punch. AdMech is notoriously one of the most expensive armies to collect, as we saw in my recent video, but it shouldn't be too surprising at what you get here. If you need and want all of the models, it's not a bad pickup, just wish there was a little more or a standout unit. Onto the Emperor's Golden Boys and we have the Adeptus Custodes Combat Patrol. Inside you get 5 Custodian Guard which you can make a Shield Captain in foot from, 3 Virtus Praetors which you can make a Shield Captain on bike from, and 10 Sisters of Silence which can either be Prosecutors, Vigilators or Witch Seekers depending on your needs. This box can make anywhere between 580 points if you make no characters to 740 if you decide to build both of them. In terms of value, you're sitting at the middle of the road with 34%, but the points certainly boost this as one of the best combat patrols currently. In terms of the units, you're probably going to just want one of these boxes, mainly due to the fact that you don't really need 20 Sisters or 6 bikes. The latter, while they look really cool, haven't been performing in this edition, but hopefully with the points drops they might start creeping back in. You could easily pick up 2 to have different variations of Sisters, and the Guard are always useful, but I can imagine next steps would be better placed getting Wardens, Terminators and Trajan with your money rather than another one of these. Overall, it's a really solid box and definitely a one-off for new Custodes players. Onto the Adeptus Sororitas now, and this is a bit of a weird one. Inside the Combat Patrol you get 1 Canoness, 10 Battle Sisters, 3 Archoflagellants, 4 Repentia with the Sister Superior, 5 Seraphim, 1 Penitent Engine and a Sororitas Rhino. This will build you a 455 point army which sits in the middle for these boxes. Value is where this gets a little tricky. Technically, it's a massive 49% discount if you bought everything separately, but this is the old launch box for the Sisters with all of the monopose models in some very odd unit sizes. The Archoflagellants in a unit of 3 and Repentia being 4 plus the leader doesn't even help if you doubled up on this box, as you couldn't get to a full squad size. The Seraphim don't have any of the weapon options, which isn't a huge deal if you get another individual box of them and just build all the special weapons on that one. Just not ideal. I definitely say this is a one-off, as you do get a wide variety of units from the army to get stuck into, but I certainly wouldn't get multiples. On to the last of the Imperial factions, and we have the Astra Militarum Combat Patrol. Inside you get 1 Cadian Command Squad, 20 Cadian Shock Troops, 1 Sentinel which can either be the armoured or scout variant, and 2 Field Ordnance teams. Depending on which variant of scout you build, it maxes out at 375 points, which is on the lower end, but pretty much expected for a troop-heavy guardsman box. In terms of value, you're looking at 35%, which is pretty good for these units, and honestly is definitely a one of and potentially a second to fill out the core of your force, before adding in all of the cool tanks that they have access to. These are all the newest models for the faction, which is also a nice to have and definitely makes the box a lot more worthwhile and helps to overlook the lower points value in the box. Moving on to the realms of Chaos now, and we have the Chaos Space Marines Combat Patrol. Inside you get 1 Dark Apostle, 10 Chaos Space Marines, 5 Havocs and 1 Hellbrute, which builds you an army of 530 points, which puts it firmly as one of the better points to price boxes in this video. In terms of value, we're sitting at 32%, which is pretty good for some nice sculpts, fun character and some damage dealing units. That being said, the only downside to the box is the Legionaries don't get the Kill Team upgrade sprue, which loses out on a few weapon options you get as part of the unit cost. And the Havocs will always have the problem, like all Devastator style units, of just one of each gun, so you can't build the optimal loadout without buying 4 boxes of them, which I definitely don't recommend. With that being said, starting off with a Chaos Space Marine army, while not the most optimal units in the force right now, this box gives you a good balanced starting point to grow an army in the direction you want. Just when things were looking a bit rosy, the Death Guard Combat Patrol comes in to spoil the party. Inside the box you get Typhus, 1 Biologus Putrefier, 7 Plague Marines and 30, yes that's 30 Poxwalkers. Building this list will create a force of 405 points, which is on the lower end, and honestly 150 of that is Poxwalkers, where you wouldn't ever want that many. Onto value, and it's technically a 36% discount with the weird unit composition in the box, and honestly I don't ever imagine you'd want to have that many Poxwalkers, which makes up for a big chunk of the value in this box. The one saving grace is those Poxwalker sprues from the 8th edition starter set have extra Plague Marine bits to be able to convert into 3 more to make up to a unit of 10, but honestly I'm still struggling to recommend the box unless you 100% wanted all of the units in it, and even then you're probably still better off getting the units you prefer. Thousand Sons are up next, and here you run into the same problem as the Death Guard Combat Patrol, this time in the form of Tzaangors. Inside the box you get 1 Infernal Master, 5 Scarabocol Terminators, 20 Tzaangors and 4 Tzaangor upgrade frames to give them 40k weapons. This will build you a list coming in at 435 points, which is average for these boxes, and while the value is technically 42%, 2/3 of the box value is made up of those Tzaangors and upgrade sprues. Don't get me wrong, there isn't anything wrong with Tzaangors, especially as backfield holders or chaff, but honestly I feel a squad of Rubrics would have been a clear winner here. Plus the Infernal Master would actually have a unit to join onto. For me, unless you really want the Tzaangors in your force and you like their aesthetic, you'd be better off buying individual kits of the characters and the units you want instead. Thankfully, this is where the poor standalone Legion boxes end, and we have the glorious World Eaters Combat Patrol. Inside you get 1 Berserker Lord on Juggernaut, which can also be built as the Lord Invocatus, 10 Jackals and a massive 20 Khorne Berserkers. This box will let you build an army between 570 and 610 points, depending on which character you choose, which is really high. Plus, in terms of discount, it's also pretty good at 38%. Honestly, I don't think there's a better way to start a World Eaters army outside that recent Christmas box, which unfortunately sold out in minutes. You get the choice of 2 great characters to build in the box, with the Invocatus ability allowing 2 units to scout move 6 inches at the start of the game, allowing everything to get up close and personal where Khorne wants them to be. Honestly, this is a slam dunk for someone starting a World Eaters army, and I don't imagine you'll ever want 2 of these unless you fancied running 40 Berserkers at the enemy, which would be a pretty scary sight. On to Chaos Demons now, and this is a bit of a weird one to talk about. Inside the box you get 1 Bloodmaster, 3 Blood Crushers, 10 Fleshhounds and 20 Bloodletters in a very Khorne heavy list. Out of the box you do get 555 points on the table, and with a 45% discount, it's a really good value box. So why am I a little hesitant? Honestly, it's mainly down to it being a mono-god box, and if you aren't someone who wanted to run Khorne demons, it's pretty much a no-go. And if you are, then it's fantastic value for some slightly older sculpts, and on the plus side with this army, it can drop into Age of Sigmar if you fancy to try that too. I think this one very much depends on the player and whether you are interested in this god, or wanted to utilise Nurgle, Slaanesh or Tzeentch. Onto the Xenos factions now, and starting off we have the Aeldari. Inside their combat patrol we have 1 Farseer, 10 Guardians which can also be Storm Guardians, 6 Windriders and 1 Wraithlord, which comes in at 515 points depending on which variant of Guardians you build. When it comes to value, it's one of the higher ones at 41%, which is pretty solid all round. It's an interesting, well-rounded force. You get a solid Warlord, battle line troops option, heavy-hitting units in a Wraithlord, and some bikes to get around the board to perform actions or objectives, so a good core to get started with. You could argue it's a little jet bike heavy, especially if you fancied getting a second box, but it is possible to convert one of the bikers into a Farseer on bike if you wanted to as well. Honestly, unless you're really into bikes, one of these is more than enough to start a force, but it's definitely a great pickup. Onto the darker cousins, the Drukhari Combat Patrol is up next and has 1 Archon, 10 Kabalite Warriors, 5 Incubi, 1 Raider and 1 Ravager. This comes in at 455 points with a 39% discount on all of those units. Honestly, with the recent changes to the Archon being able to join Incubi and the new Skysplitter Assault attachment, this already incredible box just got better. Pretty much every unit here is typically included in most forces, and it's a nice blend of firepower with the Ravager and melee threat with the Incubi backed up by the Archon. You can then add in any Witch or Coven units you may wish to expand from this, plus you can magnetise the Ravager to be spare raiders if you wanted to. Honestly, as someone very tempted myself to start this force, I wouldn't hesitate to get a couple of these boxes as a core. Onto the Tyranids now, and it has the same problems as the Space Marine Combat Patrol, being models from the starter set put into a Combat Patrol box. Inside you get 1 Winged Tyranid Prime, 1 Psychophage, 3 Von Ryan Sleepers, 5 Barbgorns, 20 Termagants and 2 Ripper Swarms. This force comes in at 485 points, which is on the higher side for these boxes. In terms of value, it's doing far better than the Marine box with 44%, but has the same issues of being the monopose kits, more so with the Termagants not having all of their weapon options. As a force, it's pretty well rounded. You get a good character, melee and shooting presence, and a lot of chaff to overrun the board, and a good amount of points in plastic in the box. But honestly, if you've purchased any of the intro boxes or Leviathan set, I can't recommend it. If this is going to be your first entry into the army, like with the Marines, if you can split an ultimate starter set with a friend, or find half on eBay of either this or Leviathan box set, it'll probably end up being a lot cheaper to pick up, and better value for you overall. Onto the Genestealer cults now, and this Combat Patrol box is the saviour for collecting this army. Inside the box you get 1 Magus, 5 Aberrants, 5 Acolyte hybrids which could also be Metamorphs, 20 Neophyte hybrids and 1 Goliath Rock Grinder which can also be built as a truck. In terms of the points in this box, you can build a force between 605 and 655 points depending on what options you choose. Plus, in terms of value, it's a massive 45%, making this one of the best, if not the best value box available in 40k, which certainly makes collecting this very expensive army a whole lot easier. The Neophytes and Acolytes are the mainstay of pretty much every list, and you'll need a lot of them. Then you have a great tank or transport option and some good melee damage dealers on top. The Magus is the only weaker choice here amongst the vast suite of characters you have access to, but this can always be converted or sold off to get the ones you actually want. Honestly, this is a slam dunk one of, and probably an easy second and third, with selling off some of the unwanted bits. Onto the greenskins now, and we have another pretty nice well-rounded combat patrol here. Inside the box you get 1 Warboss in Mega Armor, 20 Orc Boys, 3 Deathcopters and 1 Death Tread, which currently comes in at 480 points, which is above average for these boxes. In terms of value, you get a nice 43%, which on paper is great, and a very well-rounded starting force, but not without its issues. This is mainly down to the new Monopose Orc Boys kit, which comes in with a set loadout. There are tutorials online on how to convert them to get a loadout that you want, but for someone potentially getting into the hobby, this isn't ideal. On the plus side, you will need a lot of boys for your orc army as it grows, so it's not the end of the world and you can always mix some of the older sculpts into the unit to get the complete loadout you need later on down the line. The Deathcopters are great models alongside the Death Tread, and with the majority of these being pretty new sculpts as well, it's a really good box. Honestly, starting Orcs, unless you wanted to stick to the Beast Snagger theme, you can't really go wrong with this. Moving now onto the Necrons Combat Patrol, and inside the box we get 1 Overlord with Tachyon Arrow, 3 Scorpec Destroyers, 10 Necron Warriors, 3 Canoptek Scarab Swarms and 1 Canoptek Doomstalker. This list currently comes in at 460 points in total at a somewhat measly 22% discount compared to others. It's certainly an improvement over the last edition's Combat Patrol and a pretty well balanced force. The majority of these models came from the 9th edition Start Collecting boxes or Indomitors, so if you already got some of those then it's probably not worth picking up. But if you're new and thinking about starting Necrons, it's a pretty good box to start with. Certainly only the one of though, as bar the Warriors there are no other weapon options on them. Now we get onto the Tau, and honestly a really solid Combat Patrol here. Inside the box you get 1 Ethereal, 1 Cadre Fireblade, 10 Fire Warriors that can either be built as a Strike or Breacher team, 3 XV25 Stealth Battlesuits and an XV95 Ghost Keel Battlesuit. Depending on the loadout of the Fire Warriors, this box will get you up to 400 points, which is on the lower end. When it comes to value, you're getting a 37% discount on buying all the kits individually, which is pretty good. All of the models do see play and are good options, plus the Ghost Keel is a really nice centerpiece model in the box. The first one is definitely a slam dunk for sure for any player thinking about starting Tau. I wouldn't recommend more than one for duplicating characters and the Ghost Keel, as that money would be better spent elsewhere, potentially adding more of the really cool battlesuits into the force. The only decision you'll have to make is, with Tau's 10th edition codex just around the corner, whether this box is worth picking up before then, depending on what is going to be replacing it. Last of the factions is the Leagues of Votann, and inside this Combat Patrol we have 1 Carl, which can be built as Uthar the Destined, 10 Hearthkin Warriors, 5 Chthonian Berserks and 3 Hearthkin Pioneers. This tops in at 390 points depending on whether you build the standard Carl or Uthar the Destined, which is on the lower end, although with the heavy points drops this edition it's not a huge surprise. In terms of value, you're looking at a 31% discount, which is pretty much as you expect from these boxes and the newer small model range. This Combat Patrol does give you a really well-rounded force, a Carl that can attach to the warriors and give out much needed judgment tokens to the enemy, plus a squad of the battle line infantry, a melee threat with the berserks albeit a little fragile without any transport, and some great mobility which the army really needs in those bikes, which are really good on the table. If you're brand new to the army or picked up that incredible Christmas box, this is a 100% grab one of, potentially 2 to start your new force. So there we have all of the Combat Patrols, and honestly there are a fair number of these that are really good pickups, especially starting out. There are of course some which are debatable unless you like all of the units in those boxes. I'm looking at you Poxwalkers and Zangors. Plus, with a few of the factions, I can recommend getting multiple boxes of them, which really shows the quality of some of these Combat Patrols. Overall, there are more than enough good options to get a discount and start your journey onto the tabletop. While this is just a guide from myself to inform you what you can expect to get and their value, at the end of the day it's up to you if you wanted to buy the box or not. What value is from one person to another can be completely different, and as long as you're having fun in the hobby, that is all that matters. Plus, with the points values changing from one balanced data slate to another, that shouldn't be the overall driving force on whether it's worth picking up these boxes or not. Let me know down in the comment section below which your favourite combat patrol is, and if you've ever started or thinking of starting an army with one. I'd love to know. If you enjoyed the video and found it useful, please do hit that like and subscribe button, as it really helps the channel to grow. Thank you so much for watching the command phase, and I'll see you in the next video.